Hi and welcome to the latest Tech Trends podcast, brought to you by IoT Now, Vanilla Plus and the Evolving Enterprise. I'm Jeremy Cowan and I'm really glad you could join us for today's sometimes serious, sometimes light-hearted look at digital transformation for enterprises. In a moment, we've got one of my favourite tech journalists, Nick Booth, and a leading business analyst, Matt Hatton, sharing the serious news that's interested them lately. Then Matt's going to let us into his firm's secret. That's the 7 ways to harness artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, let's just call them AI and IoT, shall we? And other disruptive technologies for competitive advantage. I'm hoping it's going to be a fast track to lavish foreign holidays in the land of milk and honey. So no pressure, Matt. And finally, in What the Tech, we'll share what's made each of us smile or curse lately. Our first guest is familiar to the pod's regulars. It's Matt Hatton from Transforma Insights. Matt, warm welcome.
Hello, Jeremy. Delighted to be here.
Good to have you. And our next guest is journalist Nick Booth. Nick, welcome to the pod.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm very flattered that you favorited me.
It's great to have you here. Let's start with the headlines. Matt, I'm coming to you first. What have you spotted in the news?
Well, it's quiet times at the moment, really, for news, but I did spot one interesting story about a tie-up between T-Systems and KUKA. So T-Systems being the systems integration arm of Deutsche Telekom, and KUKA being a robot manufacturer. A lot of those robotic arms that you see, they make them, if it's not a familiar name to you. I think it's particularly interesting because it's squarely focused on manufacturing, and specifically manufacturing small and medium-sized businesses. So to me, it's indicating that this idea of factory automation is becoming more and more the norm. And we see this as one of the really interesting sectors that's set to take off. And COVID, I think, has probably had quite an impact on encouraging people to get more involved in adopting automation within factories, having not been able to put the people into the factories over the last few months. I've also got this theory about separating hardware and software layers. It's a bit of a macro theory about technology and how that tends to trigger an explosion of innovation. And this robotics world is starting to see a lot of that at the moment. Things like those companies that used to make arms used to provide all the software. And actually, you're starting to get a separate set of software robotics companies, or robotics software companies, rather. And I think this is a potentially quite an interesting trigger for a lot of innovation in the space. So certainly a good one to watch.
Oh, it's interesting. Thanks, Matt. So, Nick, which tech story has caught your eye?
Well, I've seen a number of reports into various types of change, and they call it digital transformation in one report from the University of London. There's a report on the evolving enterprise. Professor Feng Li has identified the 3 paths to digital transformation. However, I'm a bit wary of that phrase, digital transformation, having sought one myself and ended up having my fingers broken. So instead, I'm going to concentrate on a report which is by ABI Research, where they're looking at chipsets and the demand for chipsets, which they say reflect the changing nature of the infrastructure. And basically, more manufacturers are going to be needing AI chipsets for the edge than they will need for the AI chipsets for the cloud. And they predict that there's a whole new surge in demand for AI chipsets, computational chipsets, which are purely catering for localized computing at the edge. So that proves how the nature of the intelligent network is changing. More of its intelligence is devolving to the edges, to the suburbs, if you like, as another sort of form of growth, where like a town devolving. You've got a trinity of drivers. There's always a rule of 3 in these things. There's huge demand for privacy, cybersecurity, and latency. And there's 3 vehicles for this AI training and workload, which will be gateways, devices, and sensors, which are going to be finding their way all points remote on the network. all these localized areas. So yeah, it just shows how well, if this analyst is right, he reckons that AI at the edge will the chipsets made for the edge will overtake AI chipsets for the cloud in about 5 years' time.
Wow.
It's a very tight race actually, because it's almost like a photo finish with the Edge Fund finishing on $10.5 billion and the cloud chipset earned 10.25. So I'm amazed at his perspicacity of being able to predict to that degree of accuracy chipset sales in 5 years. But, fair play to him.
It's possible that he's hoping we won't come back and ask him to justify his explanations and his figures in 5 years' time. It is always interesting to see how these figures are arrived at. And it's a story I noticed, as you did, one that's well worth looking up on.
Yeah, maybe we should assign a robot to follow him around for 5 years. That's one thing that artificial intelligence could do, follow people up on their predictions.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a solution. We just haven't found it yet.
Yeah.
Nick, thanks. Thanks very much, Nick. There was a technology story I noticed on the Evolving Enterprise website, headlined "Blend Ingenuity and AI-Based Security to Protect from Hackers." And I think it was the word hackers that caught my attention. It seems there's a new report from BugCrowd, a company I hadn't come across before, a crowdsourced security company called Inside the Mind of a Hacker. That's the name of the report. And it says that human ingenuity supported by actionable intelligence, obviously from their platform, of course, are critical factors in creating a resilient infrastructure. And to put some numbers on that, they say that 78% of almost 3,500 hackers that they surveyed, these are the white hat hackers, by the way, the goodies. Anyway, 78% of them said that just using AI-powered cybersecurity solutions will not be enough to outmaneuver cyber attacks over the next decade. And nearly 9 out of 10 of the hackers added that scanners alone can't find as many critical or unknown assets as humans can. I'm tempted to say they would say that, wouldn't they? But it is interesting all the same, because the report quotes one top-ranked hacker called Jasmine Landry, who commented that hackers will always be one step ahead of AI when it comes to cybersecurity, because humans are not confined by logical limitations of machine intelligence. And I guess there's something in that.
Yeah, I think there is. It's probably bad news for Darktrace, who will tell you that you can more or less tackle any kind of hacking with AI. But I did some work on looking at the impact that AI's had on trying to tackle COVID. And the scorecard isn't particularly good because it's something new. There's not a lot of training data to work with. And AI doesn't work very well with novel things that are constantly changing, and the virus was adapting and so on. So it tends to get a pretty bad score on that. So I don't see any reason why it will be any different with hacking and with security and related issues in the IT sphere as well. It makes some sense.
Yeah, hackers are endlessly creative, aren't they? It's just it's a shame we can't harness them.
Literally or metaphorically harnessing them.
Yeah. Literally, I meant.
I was also intrigued by this another aspect of the same report that shared some interesting demographics on the hackers themselves. It's a profession that you may well know. It's well paid, and you probably won't be surprised to hear that 53% of them are under the age of 24. Not a huge surprise there. 6% of them apparently experience ADHD, attention deficit or hyperactivity disorder. And they thrive when faced with rapid change, such as security research, where creativity and original thinking are pretty well rewarded, I guess. And what else did I learn from the report on the Evolving Enterprise? Apparently, BugCrowd reported an 83% increase in hackers living in India. Nearly 3 out of 4 speak 2 or more languages. It's a profile of a hacker that is sort of sometimes stereotypical, it seems, and sometimes a little bit surprising.
I was wondering, do most criminals find it very difficult not to boast about their achievements? There must be some way of enticing them out of the woodwork flattering their egos, or
seemingly they're happy enough to complete surveys.
yeah,
So,
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And before lockdown, they were quite regularly attending one or two key shows in Las Vegas, if I remember rightly. But it seems to be an interesting profile. Anyway, you can find out more on how to protect yourself using white hats, if you want to, by checking out the report at www.theee.ai and just search for the word blend. Matt, I wanted to talk about your initiative. Your latest work at Transforma has a very bold ring to it. Your latest webinar, I think, was called 7 Ways to Harness AI, IoT, and Other Disruptive Technologies for Competitive Advantage. So tell us, what are the other 5 technologies you've zeroed in on after AI and IoT?
well, let me correct you on something. The 7 are not 7 technologies, but they're 7 strategies that organizations might use in order to best take advantage of all the various different technologies, some of which might be relevant to them and some of which might not, depending on who they are and what they do. I'll tell you a little bit about the germination of this. We did some work back in January. We published a forecast of digital transformation investment, and we found that the expectation was there'd be $5 trillion of investment between now and 2030 in what we can term digital transformation, new technology, new disruptive technology usage. Problem is that most companies aren't spectacularly good at implementing new technologies. So another part of the research that we've been doing is looking at real world deployments of all of these various different technologies: product lifecycle management, robotic process automation, AI, IoT, distributed ledger, and so forth. And looking at the various deployment parameters like time to deploy and the complexity and vendor choice and even down to some of the specific technology parameters like the types of algorithms used in AI. And we'd use that data to feed back to the companies who are deploying to say, okay, well, what's best practice in this space, and allow them to learn from the experiences of others. Now, you can use these case studies individually, or you can use them in aggregate, analyzing things at a macro level. And that was the basis of the webinar that we ran. So 2 aspects to it, really. One was we delved into some of the high level views, and part of it was we delved down into some of the specific use cases to illustrate some of these 7 strategies you can use to make sure that you've got the right technology approach. And it's things like having a thorough and systematic approach to horizon scanning, having a prioritized list of projects which you're constantly updating. It's about matching your project team to the project that you've got in hand. It's about flexibility of implementation, and having the right approach to picking the blockage and addressing the blockage, rather than necessarily just thinking in terms of what technology can I adopt. Okay, so it's those kinds of things. They formed the 7 strategies and 7 pieces of advice that we had for enterprise adopters.
That makes a lot of sense. So is it too soon from that process to identify either the industries or even the enterprises that are likely to feel the biggest impact if they do get it right?
Well, no, it's not too early. You always have lighthouse examples of deployments that have happened in just about every technology imaginable. The future's already here. It's just not very evenly distributed, as William Gibson said. But the interesting thing is those areas where it's been very widely adopted. I mentioned about manufacturing and getting down into the SMB space with the announcement with T-Systems and KUKA. And manufacturing is certainly one that we're watching with great interest, because there are a number of announcements coming out and quite a large amount of adoption. But really, the one that's probably the most mature is robotic process automation, taking a set of manual IT-based processes and automating them. And the thing is, the maturity of that technology means that it's relatively easy to adopt and gives a good return on investment. but it tends to be focused more on certain vertical sectors. Financial services is a very good example. So you'll get it for insurers or mortgage lenders, just to automate a whole load of what used to be paper pushing and became electronic document pushing. It becomes something that's automated. So where you've got that more mature technology, which we still have under our umbrella of digital transformation, you get very rapid adoption in that as a sector. There's others where it's, I think it's been forced upon them, shall we say. Retail, I think we'll see a lot more innovation in retail in the coming few years because of COVID-19. But there's a few others that are a little more slow on the uptake, shall we say. Healthcare, quite difficult to get things moving in healthcare because of all the regulations that sit behind it.
And also the complex business models, because they seldom seem to be the same in two different countries.
Yes, absolutely. And the financing is often the problem in healthcare. A different organization is paying for the care versus the one that has to pay if you fall ill or paying for the devices. So sometimes there's just not the economics to stack up to invest in it.
Yeah, I remember one of the first questions that I was asked back at me when I was interviewing somebody about IoT in healthcare. He wanted to know who I thought the customer was. Was it the patient? Was it the primary carer? Was it the tertiary carer? Was it the insurer? Was it the government? You know, and it was a pretty fair question. One to which I did not have the answer. I would have.
No, quite, and neither should you have. There are many different ways in which it can work. I think typically where we've seen the most innovation is where somebody's got money at stake in supporting the customer to be making use of some of these preemptive measures. So in the States, where it's heavily insurance based, there is a big incentive for the insurers to make sure that their customers are making use of a lot of these services. So sleep apnea devices or heart rate monitors or whatever. But if you remove that financial issue, then it slows things down somewhat. So, you know, much as we might love the NHS, there is less incentive for individuals to adopt because they don't have to pay anyway. So if the NHS says, get a sleep apnea device, well, there isn't a cost benefit associated with that to the end user because they're going to get treated whether they use one or not.
For our international listeners, the NHS, we're speaking from the UK, it's the National Health Service, which is a state-run organisation where healthcare is paid out of taxation. So, Matt, what do you think will differentiate the winners and the losers in digital transformation for enterprises? Is it possible to identify trends at this time?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, well, anybody who takes the advice that we gave on the webinar, I'm on about to mention that. But I think there are a number of interesting points that it raises about really thinking through your strategy and being prepared to make change within your organization to take advantage of it. Because a lot of these technologies will have significant implications for all manner of things that the organization does. So for the sales process, maybe if you're shifting from selling a product to providing a service, that also has a knock-on effect on finance. All of your systems will need to change, or at least the way that certain processes integrate with your systems. The people, the skills needed are almost certainly going to be different as every company transitions to being, to some extent, an IT company. So it comes back almost to a Darwinian type thing. The most adaptable will survive, whereas those that aren't won't.
The last thing I wanted to ask on this stage, Matt, was your webinar was talking about, quote, radical change being fraught with challenges. And when I see the words fraught and challenges, I tend to think that we're talking about 24-carat do or die game changers, particularly looking back at failures like Kodak failing to adapt to digital photography, or Blockbuster failing to see that streaming was coming down the tracks. So if you can do it without scaring us all too much, tell us what the risks are.
Mostly it's about missed opportunity, if I'm perfectly honest. But missed opportunity also has its own significant downside. because if you don't do it, somebody else will. So it's generally about opportunity cost. I've had an interesting conversation with a few people this week about this concept of think big, start small, and move fast. Now, I'm a little bit skeptical about this. I think if you make your decisions based on picking projects which are deliberately small, because that's your parameters that you've defined for how you pick your projects, then you are bound to run into some problems. You should pick the projects that are the most appropriate. If your house was on fire, you wouldn't start small in trying to put it out. You'd start on the house. You wouldn't start on the dog's kennel, right? The same thing's true here. Now, it might not appear to be quite as immediate, but there are always competitive pressures coming, and will always be new competitive pressures coming, largely from Amazon, it seems, in this day and age, but it could be from any number of different organizations. So you have to be on the board, you have to be aware of what's happening, and have a plan for implementing based on a set of parameters which are specific to your organization, rather than just saying, oh, we'll do something small, because that seems to be the phrase that everybody's alighted on.
Yeah. So Matt, where can anyone find out more about your work on this?
The webinar is, well, there's a link to the webinar on our website, which is transformainsights.com, transformer with an A. And if you go to the blog, there is a blog post from about a week ago, which has a link to the replay of the webinar, so you can find it there.
Brilliant. Okay, we've reached the section of the podcast called What the Tech, where we share something tech-based that either made us smile or maybe just made us mad. Matt, while I've got you, what's amused you?
I mentioned earlier it was silly season, shall we say, so there's less of the proper news and more silly stories, but there was a couple of things that I saw. One was, and I'm going to paraphrase it a little because I didn't make a note of what the exact wording was in the tweet that I saw, but it was some wag making a point that on the 1st of August 2020 at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, the final company completed its digital transformation, so we're all done now, which kind of made me laugh because it does point to the fact that the terminology that we use is perhaps not the greatest. Transformation implies you start, you finish, and then it's done. And actually, all of this is much more ongoing. It's a series of repeated, or not necessarily repeated, but ongoing process of evolution and development that doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end. Well, maybe it has a beginning. The other one, if I can just throw this in as well, there is a wonderful video on YouTube, I believe, where Andy Stanford Clark of IBM is explaining quantum computing to Mirko Ross in 2 minutes. Anybody who's deep within the IoT world will know both of those people. It's a wonderful thing. Recommend you check it out. Worth 2 minutes of anyone's time.
Excellent. Well, we'll try and get a link to that in our publicity around this. I love the idea that digital transformation is done. It just sounds so much like Francis Fukuyama in his book, The End of History.
Actually, what Francis Fukuyama was talking about was the end as in the objective of history, rather than the end being the finish of history. He made that point in a few places. I think people misunderstood that one, but that maybe is a conversation for another day.
Well, I was obviously one that misunderstood it, so I'm very glad you corrected me.
As did almost everybody, Jeremy.
It's quite reassuring that it's done, though, isn't it?
Yes, glad it's all over.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not sure what we're all going to do now.
No, we have to find something else.
We have to go back.
Nick, what's made you smile lately?
I saw another report it's in the Evolving Enterprise about there's a character who comes up a lot. It's called Dr. Carrie Cooper. I don't know if you've ever seen, professor of organizational psychology. But he's quoted in a report by EPOS, who they make audio and video solutions. And of course, they say that there's this terrible problem of stress in the workforce. And funny enough, it's caused by audio setbacks. And by a remarkable coincidence, they make the solution to these audio setbacks. So I love these reports where independent research has dovetailed perfectly with their marketing strategy. But maybe there is a problem with remote working. They say remote working adds up to a global threat because of the stressful noises that affect our brains, and apparently they have a terrible audio sensory overload that hits the brain and releases the stress hormone cortisol, which cost the economy £29 billion, apparently. I don't know how they add that up, but do you think there's something in this? A bad audio experience is really ruining our productivity?
Well, I think if we all spent all day on Zoom or Teams or whatever, then possibly yes. But then that's perhaps a failure of bad management. I do think you're right, though, that there is a frustration level that builds when you spend too long on these things. And I don't blame the technology personally. I blame the work regime.
I find the silence of working at home is the silence which is more oppressive. It's the noisiest silence. Or I don't know. I was thinking as well, maybe there is a market in noises like canned laughter at home. You know, you could have canned encouragement.
I've got 3 teenagers, Nick, so silence is an alien concept.
Oh, fair enough.
And for those of us who worked from home for the last decade or more, it's not really a big issue. But I did see a news article about people playing office background noise at home.
Oh yeah.
Putting it onto their Sonos or whatever, so that there's some background noise as if they were in the office, which I found bizarre. But then I haven't worked in an office for, as I said, a decade. So maybe it's the kind of thing that people need.
I was thinking there was maybe a chance for an app where you could see what all your colleagues are doing. You don't have to talk to them, but you just can see them. I find that quite reassuring. When we used to work in an office, I never used to talk much anyway, but I just liked being around people. You know, it's the reassurance of seeing them there.
I think a job in the NSA beckons, doesn't it, for you?
Yeah.
I just wanted to share with you a few words of caution. These were given by none other than Dr. Anthony Fauci, the USA's top infectious disease expert.
Oh, yeah.
And he spent a bit of time this year treading a particularly difficult line between reality and President Trump's prescription of injected bleach as a cure for the coronavirus. Now the poor guy's getting media questions about another president, Vladimir Putin. I heard yesterday that he was asked about Vlad the Injector's claim that a Russian-developed vaccine is leading the world. From everything I understand, it isn't. There are obviously numerous projects that are more advanced. Dr. Fauci told ABC, having a vaccine and proving that a vaccine is safe and effective are 2 different things. We have half a dozen or more vaccines. I hope that the Russians have definitely proven that the vaccine is safe and effective. I seriously doubt that they've done that. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to belittle the work of Russia's Gamaleya Research Institute, which is a respected organization, has led the research and development. But being state-owned, you've got to say it does raise questions of timing when even the Association of Clinical Trials Organizations has asked the Russian Health Ministry to postpone approval just until the final trial had been successfully completed. Because never mind phase 3 testing with thousands of participants, apparently it hasn't even completed phase 2 tests with 100 people. The other thing I couldn't help noticing was that Putin hasn't taken the vaccine himself. Even though he's 67 years old and is at higher risk of complications if he does contract COVID. Instead, it seems he told Russia that one of his daughters had taken the vaccine in trials. I'm not sure if it was his daughter Katerina, the acrobatic dancer, or Maria, the endocrinologist. I'll leave you to fill in your own parental care joke here. I'm not going to do all the heavy lifting for you.
His daughter Petri dish.
Okay, guys, time's up. Let me finish by saying a big thank you. Firstly to Matt Hatton of TransformaInsights.com.
Thanks, Jeremy.
And my thanks also to Nick Booth, whose byline you can find on pretty much all of our sites. He's always worth reading. Nick, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure you've enjoyed it.
And thank you too, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us around the world. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you found this pod and be a total star and give us a 5-star rating and say something really nice. It makes such a difference when people are looking for something new to listen to. So until the next time, keep safe, keep checking IoT Now, Vanilla Plus, and the EE for tech news and features. And join us again soon for a Tech Trends podcast looking at enterprise digital transformation. Bye for now.